Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. My name is Riley, and I'm 18 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened during the summer of 2024, and I swear on everything I hold sacred that every word is true. This isn't my first encounter with something unexplainable, but it was by far the worst. The memory still wakes me up at night, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Our family had been visiting Burunjuk Dam for water skiing trips since I was 7. The massive reservoir, nestled in the hills outside Brisbane, had always been our escape from the suffocating city heat. Mom would pack our gear with military precision, while Dad checked the boat trailer for the third time. My younger brother Connor would bounce around the house like a pinball, asking every 5 minutes if we were ready to leave yet. The drive always took 4 hours, winding through increasingly remote countryside until civilization seemed like a distant memory. That particular trip felt different from the moment we left our driveway. The radio kept cutting to static despite Dad fiddling with the antenna. Mom seemed unusually quiet, staring out the passenger window with an expression I couldn't read. Even Connor had stopped his usual chatter after the first hour. By the time we reached the dam's entrance gates, darkness had swallowed the landscape whole. The security booth sat like a lonely island in a sea of black, its fluorescent light buzzing and flickering intermittently. The elderly guard who emerged looked like he hadn't smiled in decades, his weathered face mapped with deep lines that seemed to spell out warnings I couldn't understand. While my family handled the check-in process, I remained in the back seat, finishing a video on my phone. The screen's glow created a small bubble of normalcy in the growing unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. When the video ended, I looked up to survey our surroundings through the car windows. The dam stretched out before us, its dark surface reflecting nothing but void. Twisted eucalyptus trees lined the shoreline, their pale bark appearing almost skeletal in the weak light from the security booth. Something about the way they swayed in the windless night made my stomach clench. But it was more than just the trees. The entire place felt wrong, as if we had driven into somewhere we weren't supposed to be. That's when I first felt it watching me. The sensation started as a prickling at the base of my neck, the kind of awareness that makes every animal instinct scream danger. I turned slowly in my seat, scanning the tree line beyond the parking area. At first, I saw nothing but shadows layered upon shadows. Then, like a photograph developing in slow motion, I began to make out a shape that didn't belong. 2 points of red light hovered at what would be eye level for something impossibly tall. They weren't moving, just fixed on our car with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. I blinked hard, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I opened my eyes, those red points had moved closer. Panic rising in my throat, I spun around to look out the opposite window, and what I saw there nearly stopped my heart entirely. The thing stood no more than 10 feet from our car, close enough that I could make out details that would burn themselves into my memory forever. Its face was the color of old bone, stretched tight over a skull that seemed too large for any natural creature. But it was the eyes that held me frozen. They glowed like hot coals, not with any light source I could identify, but with something that seemed to come from within. The lower half of its face was the stuff of nightmares. Its jaw appeared to have been split down the middle, creating 2 separate mandibles that hung at unnatural angles. What I had initially thought was fur was actually patches of something dark and matted, clinging to gaunt limbs that looked like they might snap under their own weight. The creature's entire body twitched and jerked as if electricity was running through it in random bursts. Standing at least 9 feet tall, it loomed over our vehicle like some grotesque scarecrow brought to life. The moment I blinked, it vanished. Not gradually, not by stepping back into the shadows, but simply gone as if it had never been there at all. When my family returned to the car, chattering about cabin arrangements and tomorrow's skiing plans, I tried to tell them what I had seen. But the words came out in a jumbled rush that made me sound like I was having some kind of breakdown. Dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror with concern, while Mom suggested I might be getting carsick from the long drive. Connor just rolled his eyes and muttered something about his dramatic older brother under his breath. Our cabin sat at the water's edge, a modest structure with large windows that faced the dam. During daylight hours, those windows would offer stunning views of the water and surrounding hills. But in the darkness, they became mirrors that reflected our lit interior while concealing whatever might be lurking outside. I couldn't shake the image of that creature from my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twin red flames staring back at me. Sleep became impossible as my mind raced through rational explanations. Maybe it had been a large dog with some kind of disease. Maybe the red eyes were just reflections from our car's taillights. Maybe I was more exhausted from the drive than I realized. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations fit what I had witnessed. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely and moved to the window. The dam's surface was perfectly still, like a sheet of black glass. Moonlight created a narrow path across the water, but it only made the surrounding darkness seem deeper and more impenetrable. That's when I saw it again. The creature stood at the water's edge, maybe 50 yards from our cabin. This time, I had a clear view of its full height and the way it moved with an unsettling, jerky gait. It seemed to be pacing back and forth along the shoreline, occasionally stopping to turn its head in our direction. I grabbed Connor's shoulder and shook him awake, desperate to have someone else witness what I was seeing. He groaned and complained about being woken up, but I dragged him to the window anyway. By the time his eyes focused enough to look where I was pointing, the shoreline was empty again. "You're losing it," he mumbled before stumbling back to his bed. Probably just saw a kangaroo or something. But I knew kangaroos didn't stand 9 feet tall or have eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. The next morning brought brilliant sunshine and a perfect breeze for water skiing. Mom insisted that some fresh air and physical activity would cure whatever vacation jitters I was experiencing. Despite my protests, she had me suited up and ready to hit the water before I had finished my coffee. The lake was busier than I had ever seen it, dotted with boats of every size and color. Families were already out enjoying the morning calm, their laughter carrying across the water like music. For the first time since our arrival, I began to relax. Maybe Connor was right. Maybe I had just been tired and seeing things. Mom piloted our boat with her usual skill, carving smooth turns through the water while I rode behind on the kneeboard. The familiar rhythm of skiing began to work its magic, washing away the previous night's fears with each spray of cool water across my face. We headed toward the small island that sat in the dam's center, a popular turnaround point for skiers. As we approached, I signaled for Mom to pick up speed, wanting to feel the rush of cutting through the water at maximum velocity. That's when everything went wrong. The boat hit some kind of wake that seemed to come from nowhere, bouncing me so hard that my grip on the rope was torn away. I hit the water with enough force to drive the breath from my lungs, surfacing with my ears ringing and my vision blurred. I raised my hand in the standard signal for pickup, expecting to see Mom already turning the boat around. But when I looked toward where our boat should have been, I saw nothing but empty water. Every boat that had been dotting the lake just minutes before had vanished. The water was completely deserted, as if I had been transported to a different place entirely. I treaded water and spun in a complete circle, searching for any sign of life, but found only an unnatural silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. I shouted for Mom until my throat was raw, but the sound seemed to be swallowed by the air itself, creating no echo, no response, nothing. The island, which had seemed so close when I fell, now appeared impossibly distant. No matter how hard I swam toward it, it never seemed to get any closer. Panic began to claw at my chest as I realized I might be trapped in open water with no way to reach shore. But panic turned to terror when I felt something brush against my leg beneath the surface. I woke up on the rocky shore as the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. My head throbbed, and my mouth tasted like I had been chewing on copper pennies. I was wearing only my underwear, though I distinctly remembered going to bed fully clothed the night before. Confusion mixed with relief as I realized the boat incident must have been a dream. But if it was a dream, how had I ended up on the shoreline a quarter-mile from our cabin? The rocks beneath me were real enough, digging into my back with sharp persistence. Light scratches covered my chest and arms, as if I had been dragged through brambles. My feet were in terrible condition. The soles were torn and bloody, making each step an agony as I began the trek back to the cabin. Sharp stones and broken branches seemed to find every sensitive spot, forcing me to stop frequently to rest and assess the damage. During one of these stops, sitting on a boulder near the water's edge, I heard movement in the brush behind me. The sound was wrong somehow, too heavy and deliberate to be made by any native animal. When I turned to investigate, I saw it again. The creature stood perhaps 30 yards away, partially obscured by low-hanging branches. In daylight, it looked even more disturbing than it had in the darkness. What I had thought might be diseased fur was actually patches of something dark and oily that seemed to move independently of any breeze. Its pale skin was mottled with dark veins that pulsed visibly beneath the surface. But it was the smell that nearly made me vomit. Even at that distance, the stench of rot and something chemical sweet filled my nostrils. It was the smell of things that should have been buried long ago. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I called out to it. My voice cracked as I asked who it was, what it wanted. The creature's head snapped toward me with an unnatural speed that made my vision blur. For a moment, we stared at each other across that small clearing. Then, it began to move. The creature didn't run toward me in any conventional sense. Instead, it moved through the trees with a fluid, almost liquid motion that defied everything I knew about anatomy and physics. One moment it was behind one tree, the next it had somehow flowed to another position entirely, always maintaining that fixed, burning stare. I ran. My already damaged feet sent lightning bolts of pain up my legs with each step, but terror pushed me beyond any physical limitation I had ever experienced. Behind me, the sound of branches breaking filled the air like gunshots. Whatever was pursuing me was large enough and strong enough to snap trees that would have stopped a charging bull. I dove behind the largest eucalyptus I could find, pressing my back against its rough bark and trying to control my ragged breathing. The breaking sounds had stopped, replaced by something far worse. Silence so complete it felt like the world had died around me. Carefully, I peered around the tree trunk. The creature stood motionless about 20 yards away, its head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. It was listening, or perhaps smelling the air, searching for any sign of my location. Then it began to make sounds. A series of clicks emanated from its throat, rapid and rhythmic like some alien Morse code. Beneath the clicking, a low moan built in volume and intensity, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed almost like speech. But if it was communication, it was in no language meant for human ears. The creature began moving again, this time heading toward a dense thicket near the base of a hill. My curiosity, that fatal flaw that had gotten me into trouble countless times before, overrode my common sense. Despite every rational thought telling me to head straight back to the cabin, I found myself following at a distance. The trail it left was impossible to miss. Broken branches, deep gouges in the earth, and patches of that oily substance marked its passage like breadcrumbs leading into the heart of darkness itself. The creature led me to what could only be described as a den, though calling it that seemed inadequate for the horror I discovered. Carved into the hillside, partially natural cave and partially something that had been excavated by claws or tools, the opening yawned like a mouth ready to swallow the unwary. The creature had disappeared inside, leaving me alone at the entrance with a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I could turn around, go back to the cabin, and try to convince myself that none of this was real. Or I could step into that darkness and finally learn the truth about what I had been seeing. Curiosity won, as I somehow knew it always would. The stench hit me like a physical blow as soon as I crossed the threshold. It was the smell from earlier, but concentrated to an almost unbearable degree. Decay, chemicals, and something else I couldn't identify but that made my lizard brain scream warnings about disease and death. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, details began to emerge that turned my stomach and confirmed my worst fears. Bones were scattered across the floor of the cave, some clearly animal, but others that looked disturbingly human-like in their proportions. They had been gnawed and cracked, with marrow extracted in ways that spoke of both hunger and intelligence. But it was the collection of personal items that truly terrified me. Cell phones, wallets, jewelry, medication bottles, even articles of clothing were arranged around the cave's perimeter like trophies. Some looked recent, with screens still intact and leather still supple. Others appeared to have been there for months or even years, corroded and weathered by time in the cave's humid atmosphere. I picked up the nearest phone, hoping it might still have power for its flashlight function. The screen came to life immediately, and to my horror, music began blasting at full volume. The previous owner had left their media player running, and the sudden cacophony echoed through the cave like an alarm. I fumbled with the device, trying desperately to stop the sound, but it was too late. From somewhere deep in the cave's recesses came the sound of movement. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approached the main chamber where I stood, frozen in terror. The clicking sound filled the air again, closer now and more agitated than before. Beneath it, that inhuman moaning rose to a pitch that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I dropped to my hands and knees, crawling behind a pile of debris as the creature entered the chamber. In the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, I could see the creature more clearly than ever before. What I had thought might be some kind of diseased animal was something far worse. The proportions were wrong in every way, as if someone had tried to build a human from memory but had gotten all the details slightly off. Its movements were deliberate and intelligent as it searched the cave, checking each corner and crevice with the methodical precision of a hunter that knew its territory intimately. The clicking sounds it made seemed to serve as a kind of echolocation, allowing it to map the space around it even in near-total darkness. I pressed myself deeper into my hiding spot, hardly daring to breathe as those red eyes swept the chamber. When they passed over my location, I felt a cold certainty that it knew exactly where I was and was simply choosing not to act immediately. Then, like a miracle sent from God himself, a beam of light pierced the cave entrance. Someone was outside with a powerful flashlight, calling out in a voice rough with years of tobacco use. The creature's head snapped toward the entrance, and in an instant, it was gone. Not fled, not hidden, but simply absent, as if it had never been there at all. The oppressive weight that had been crushing down on me lifted, and I could suddenly move again. I scrambled toward the entrance, bursting into the blessed darkness of night where an old man in ranger's clothes stood with his flashlight. He took one look at my condition, bloody, half-naked, and clearly traumatized, and asked what had happened. When I tried to explain, he held up a weathered hand to stop me. His eyes held a knowledge that chilled me even more than the creature had. He knew. He had seen others like me before, others who had encountered what lived in these hills. "You're not the first," he said simply, "and you won't be the last. But if you know what's good for you, you'll never speak of this to anyone official. The Rangers don't want to hear it, and the police sure as hell don't." He walked me back to the cabin where my parents were waiting with worry etched deep in their faces. They had been searching for me for hours, unable to understand how I had simply vanished from my bed. I told them I had gotten lost trying to find the bathroom outside, a lie that satisfied no one, but that we all agreed to accept. We left the next morning, cutting our vacation short by 3 days. During the drive home, I stared out the back window, watching Burrinjuk Dam shrink in the distance. I told myself I was safe now, that whatever lived in those hills couldn't follow us back to the city. But that night, Connor came into my room with fear in his eyes that I recognized all too well. "Riley," he whispered, "there's something outside my window." When we looked out into our suburban backyard, we saw nothing but the usual garden and fence. But I knew that didn't mean we were safe. Some things, once they have your scent, never stop hunting. The scratches on my chest took weeks to heal, but the memory of those red eyes burning in the darkness will stay with me forever. I still wake up some nights, certain I can smell that chemical-sweet stench of decay, and I find myself checking and rechecking the locks on our doors and windows. They say curiosity killed the cat, but sometimes curiosity does worse than kill. Sometimes it shows you things that should stay hidden, things that prove the world is far stranger and more dangerous than we pretend it is. And sometimes those things follow you home. The forest around Pinewood Station had always been my sanctuary. After 4 years as a ranger, I'd grown accustomed to its moods. The way sunlight dappled through leaves in summer, how fog clung to the ground on autumn mornings, even the eerie stillness that descended during winter storms. But that night in early October, something felt fundamentally wrong about the place I'd come to love. I arrived for the night shift at 10 p.m., my boots crunching on the gravel parking lot as I approached the weathered cabin that served as our outpost. Rain had been threatening all day, and the air hung heavy with moisture and unease. Overhead, clouds obscured the stars, leaving only occasional glimpses of a waning moon that cast weak, shifting light across the clearing. "Evening, Will," I called out as I stepped through the door, shaking moisture from my jacket. The station's interior should have felt familiar and comforting. The worn wooden desk with its ancient radio equipment, the small kitchenette in the corner, the maps of Hollow Grove Wilderness area covering the walls. Instead, the space felt unnaturally confined, as if the walls had inched closer while I wasn't looking. Will glanced up from the logbook, his expression tense. "Hey, Nora, glad you're here. It's been quiet." Something in his tone made me pause. In our line of work, quiet usually meant good. No lost hikers, no forest fires, no trouble. But the way he said it suggested otherwise. "Anything I should know about?" I asked, hanging my jacket on the peg by the door. "Nothing concrete." Will closed the logbook with a deliberate movement. "Just a feeling. Been getting calls from campers in the north section. They keep reporting noises after dark. Voices that aren't quite voices. Movement at the edge of their campsites." I nodded slowly. "Probably just wildlife. Deer get pretty bold this time of year." That's what I told them. Will stood and gathered his things. "But keep your radio close tonight. I just can't shake this feeling that something's off." After Will left, I settled into the night's routine, checking weather reports, reviewing trail conditions, and monitoring the emergency frequency. Outside, the wind picked up, sending branches scratching against the station's roof like fingernails. I tried to focus on paperwork, but my attention kept drifting to the windows, now reflecting the interior lights like black mirrors. Around midnight, the radio crackled to life. "Pinewood, this is Tanner. You there, Nora?" The voice belonged to Stephanie, who was stationed at the eastern lookout. I reached for the handset. "Reading you, Tanner. Everything okay?" "Just checking in. Have you been outside in the last hour?" Her voice sounded oddly strained. "No, why?" A pause. I thought I saw lights in the woods about half a mile from your position. Moving lights, like flashlights, but they weren't following any trail. I moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Campers, maybe? Or poachers? Maybe. Another pause. But they were moving too, synchronized, like they knew exactly where they were going. I felt the first real stirring of unease. Want me to check it out? No, she said quickly. Just stay alert. Something doesn't feel right tonight. After signing off, I found myself unable to settle. The station suddenly felt too isolated, a tiny island of light in a vast ocean of darkness. I'd spent countless nights here alone, but never before had I felt so intensely watched. At 2 a.m., I decided to step outside for a routine perimeter check. The moment I opened the door, the forest's atmosphere hit me. A wall of cold, damp air carrying the scent of wet leaves and something else I couldn't identify. Something acrid and wrong. My flashlight cut a weak cone through the darkness as I walked the station's perimeter. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of leaves under my boots, the drip of moisture from branches, the distant call of an owl. Nothing looked out of place, yet I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes tracking my movement. Near the woodshed, my beam caught something unusual, a small arrangement of twigs on the ground, too deliberate to be natural. I crouched for a closer look. Someone had arranged thin branches in a crude star pattern, with what looked like animal bones placed at each point. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was no random forest debris. Someone had been here, and recently. Back inside, I radioed Stephanie, describing what I'd found. "Don't touch it," she warned. "There've been reports of similar things near abandoned campsites. The district supervisor thinks it might be connected to some kind of local ritual, maybe kids messing around." "You don't sound convinced," I noted. "I'm not." Her voice dropped lower. "Hollow Grove has always had stories, Nora, long before it became a wilderness area. Indigenous people avoided certain parts of these woods. Early settlers reported strange disappearances." I swallowed hard. "You're not usually one for ghost stories." "It's not about ghosts," she replied. "It's about respect. Some places don't want us there. And I think something in these woods is making that very clear." After we signed off, I found myself checking the locks on the doors and windows, drawing the blinds tight. The wind had picked up again, and rain began to patter against the roof. I tried to concentrate on my reports, but every unexpected noise made me tense. Around 4 a.m., I heard it, a sound so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been so on edge. A soft scraping against the station's back wall, like someone dragging their fingers across the wooden siding. I froze, my pen hovering above half-completed paperwork. The scraping continued, moving slowly around the perimeter of the building. It wasn't random, it was methodical, as if someone was testing every inch of the structure for weakness. I grabbed my flashlight and service pistol, though regulation forbade using weapons, except in life-threatening situations. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I approached the window nearest to the sound. Carefully, I parted the blinds a fraction of an inch. At first, I saw nothing but darkness and the glistening surfaces of rain-soaked trees. Then, movement caught my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just where the station's exterior light faded into shadow. It was tall and motionless, its features obscured by what looked like a hooded coat. Despite the pouring rain, it made no move for shelter, simply standing there, facing the station, watching. I let the blind fall back and retreated to the desk, radio in hand. But before I could call for backup, the lights flickered once, twice, and went out. The station plunged into darkness, broken only by the weak glow of emergency lights. In that moment of primal fear, with rain drumming on the roof and wind howling through the trees, I understood what the forest had been trying to tell me all along. We were not alone, and we were not welcome. Morning came with a fragile sense of relief. As sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long rectangles across the station floor, I found myself questioning the events of the night. Had I really seen a figure standing in the rain, or had exhaustion played tricks on my mind? The power had returned around 5 a.m., a common occurrence during storms, and with it came the comforting hum of electricity and reason. My relief was short-lived. Just after 8 a.m., the door swung open, bringing a gust of cool air and Supervisor Howard, his face grim beneath his rain-speckled hat. "Rough night?" he asked, noticing my disheveled appearance. I nodded, pouring a second cup of coffee. Power went out, and there was someone outside the station. Howard's expression darkened. Someone? Not wildlife? Definitely human, I confirmed, describing the hooded figure and the strange arrangement of twigs I'd found. He sighed heavily, removing his hat. "You're not the first to report something like this. We've had 3 similar incidents in the past month. Strange markings near trails, unauthorized persons after hours, equipment tampering." "What do you think it is?" I asked, watching his face carefully. Howard hesitated. "Officially, probably just vandals or thrill seekers. The department doesn't want us spreading panic." He glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "Unofficially, I think we've got a problem, a serious one." He asked me to finish my shift report while he made some calls. As I typed, my mind kept returning to the figure in the rain. There had been something unnervingly patient about the way it stood there, as if time meant nothing to it. When Howard returned, he carried a dusty file box. "I've been collecting information," he explained, setting it on the desk. "Reports, local history, newspaper clippings, anything related to unusual occurrences in Hollow Grove." Inside the box were dozens of manila folders, each meticulously labeled with dates spanning decades. Howard pulled one out marked 1976-1982. 7 hikers disappeared during this period, he said, spreading photographs across the desk. All in the same 5-mile radius of the North Ridge. The official conclusion was that they got lost, succumbed to exposure, standard wilderness fatalities. "But you don't believe that?" I ventured. "What I believe," Howard said carefully, "is that the search teams found things they couldn't explain. Items arranged in patterns, strange markings on trees, and footprints that started and stopped impossibly, as if whoever made them had appeared and vanished mid-stride." He pulled out another folder labeled 1998. "This is where it gets interesting. A graduate student doing research on local folklore interviewed elderly residents about Hollow Grove. Most of them refused to speak on record, but one man, a former logger named Roy Garrison, provided detailed accounts." Howard handed me a transcript. The pages were filled with Garrison's recollections of what the logging crews called the Watchers. Figures occasionally glimpsed among distant trees, always observing, never approaching. According to Garrison, the company had abandoned a particularly lucrative section of forest after 3 men vanished in 1 week. "They found one of them," I read aloud from the transcript, "or parts of him, arranged real careful like at the base of a big oak, like some kind of offering. The other 2, never a trace." The interview continued with Garrison's claims that the Watchers weren't supernatural but human, members of what he called the Grove, a secretive group that had inhabited the deep forest for generations, protecting territory they considered sacred. "Do you think there's any truth to this?" I asked, feeling a chill despite the station's warmth. Howard shrugged. "I think these woods have secrets, and I think someone doesn't want us uncovering them." Throughout the day, rangers from other stations reported in. 2 mentioned finding similar twig arrangements near their outposts. Another described how his motion sensor cameras had been found neatly disassembled, the memory cards missing. Each incident on its own might have been dismissed as vandalism or wildlife interference. Together they formed a pattern that couldn't be ignored. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, and I joined Howard and two other rangers, Camilla and Ben, for a sweep of the area surrounding Pinewood Station. The forest felt different in daylight, less threatening but somehow more secretive, as if it had drawn a veil over the evidence of the previous night's disturbances. We found nothing at first. The ground was too wet to hold clear footprints, and the twig arrangement I'd seen had been scattered, whether by wind or deliberately I couldn't tell. Then Camilla called us over to the north side of the clearing. Half hidden beneath a fallen log was a small leather pouch, darkened with age and moisture. Howard carefully picked it up with a gloved hand and loosened the drawstring. Inside was a collection of objects that made little sense together. A rusted key, several small animal teeth, a tarnished coin with unfamiliar markings, and a folded piece of paper. Howard carefully unfolded the paper to reveal a crude map of Hollow Grove, with certain areas marked with symbols none of us recognized. "This is recent," he said, pointing to notations in the margin. "These are ranger station locations, including temporary outposts we only established last month." We exchanged uneasy glances. Someone had been monitoring our movements closely enough to create a detailed record of our presence in the forest. "We should report this," Ben suggested. Howard nodded slowly. "We will. But between us, I don't think we'll get much help. The department is focused on the upcoming tourist season. They don't want stories about strange occurrences scaring visitors away." "So what do?" I asked. "We watch," Howard replied grimly. "We document everything, and we stick together. No more solo night shifts until we figure out what we're dealing with." As we walked back to the station, I noticed something we'd all missed on our way out. A series of small marks carved into tree trunks, forming a line that led deeper into the forest. The marks were fresh, the exposed wood still pale against the dark bark. "It's a trail," Ben whispered. "They're leaving signs for each other." Howard studied the markings with a troubled expression. "They want us to know they're here, that this is their territory, not ours." "Or," Camilla suggested quietly, "they're leading us somewhere." The thought hung in the air between us, unsettling in its implications. Were we being invited to follow? And if so, to what end? Back at the station, Howard radioed headquarters to report our findings. The response was predictably bureaucratic. File the reports, bag the evidence, increase patrols. No additional resources, no investigation beyond our standard protocols. "They think we're overreacting," Howard said after ending the call, his frustration evident. "Maybe we are," Ben offered, though he didn't sound convinced. I thought about the figure I'd seen standing in the rain, so patient and still. "No," I said firmly. "Something's happening in these woods. Something organized and deliberate. And I think it's been happening for a long time." As twilight approached, bringing with it the promise of another long night, we prepared the station as if for a siege, checking equipment, securing windows, establishing a rotation so no one would be alone on watch. Despite our preparations, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The forest had been trying to tell us something, and if the pattern held, tonight we might finally hear its message, whether we wanted to or not. Night fell more quickly than seemed natural, as if darkness had been waiting impatiently at the forest's edge. The four of us, Howard, Camilla, Ben, and myself, gathered in the main room of Pinewood Station, our casual conversation failing to mask the tension that hummed between us like a live wire. Howard had insisted we maintain normal operations, though normal now included doubled patrols and strict buddy protocols. No one ventured outside alone, not even to check the generator or retrieve supplies from the shed. "Radio check every 30 minutes, Howard reminded us, adjusting his equipment. "Any sign of unusual activity, you report immediately. No heroics, no investigating on your own." The night shift began uneventfully. Ben and I took the first outdoor patrol, circling the station's immediate perimeter with flashlights that seemed inadequate against the pressing darkness. The forest sounds were typical: wind through branches, the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures, yet somehow amplified, as if the woods were holding its collective breath, and these small noises escaped despite its best efforts. "Do you feel that?" Ben whispered as we rounded the eastern corner of the station. I didn't need to ask what he meant. The sensation of being watched had returned, stronger than before. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, the beam catching nothing but ordinary foliage. "There's nothing there," I said, more to convince myself than Ben. "That we can see," he countered, his voice tight. We completed our circuit and returned inside, where Howard and Camilla were reviewing topographical maps of the area, marking locations of previous incidents. The pattern they'd identified formed a rough semicircle around the most remote sections of Hollow Grove. "It's like they're establishing a boundary," Howard observed, "pushing back against our presence in certain areas." Camilla pointed to several unmarked regions. "These parts haven't had any reported activity. They're also the most heavily trafficked by tourists and day hikers." "So they're avoiding public attention," I suggested. "Or," Ben added, "they only care about the deep forest, the places most people never go." The radio crackled, startling us all. It was Stephanie from the Eastern Lookout. "Pinewood, be advised. I'm tracking movement approximately 1 mile from your position, heading your way. Multiple heat signatures on the thermal." Howard grabbed the handset. "How many?" "At least 6, moving in formation. They're keeping to dense cover, avoiding clearings." "Can you identify?" Howard asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Negative. But they're definitely human-sized, and they're moving with purpose." Howard instructed her to continue monitoring and to alert Forest Service headquarters. Then he turned to us, his decision already made. "Defensive positions. Camila, secure the communication equipment. Ben, check all entries. Nora, help me with the lights." We moved with practiced efficiency, dimming interior lights to reduce our visibility from outside while maintaining enough illumination to work. Howard and I covered windows with blackout material kept for emergency situations, leaving small gaps for observation. Through one such gap, I caught my first glimpse of them. Dark figures moving at the forest's edge, their forms seeming to blend with the shadows between trees. They made no attempt to conceal their presence now, standing just beyond the clearing that surrounded the station. "I count 8, Howard murmured, watching through binoculars. "All in dark clothing, some kind of hooded garments." "What are they doing?" Camilla asked, joining us at the window. "Waiting," I realized. Just like last night. For nearly an hour, the figures remained motionless, forming an irregular line among the trees. They made no attempt to approach the station, no threatening movements, yet their silent vigil felt more menacing than any overt aggression. "This is psychological," Ben whispered. "They're trying to wear us down." Howard nodded grimly. "Standard intimidation tactic. Create uncertainty, generate fear, force a mistake." "It's working," Camilla admitted. The radio crackled again. Stephanie's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Pinewood, I've lost visual on the group. They've moved into a blind spot. Headquarters is sending backup. ETA 40 minutes. Howard acknowledged the message, then turned to us. "They won't wait that long. Whatever they're planning, it'll happen soon." He was right. Moments later, the station's exterior sensors triggered, indicating movement near the western wall, the side opposite from where we'd been observing the watchers. "They've split up," Howard realized. "The ones we saw were a distraction." A sharp crack echoed through the station as something struck a window, not hard enough to break the glass, but with sufficient force to send a spiderweb of cracks across its surface. Then another window, and another, impacts coming from all sides in rapid succession. "They're testing our defenses," Howard said, his voice steady despite the escalating situation. Stay calm, stay together. The impacts continued for several minutes, then stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick with anticipation and dread. Then came a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the station's walls, like dozens of fingers drumming in unison. It created a disorienting effect, making it impossible to determine how many individuals surrounded us or where exactly they were positioned. "What are they doing?" Ben hissed, his earlier composure beginning to fray. I moved to a different window, careful to stay in shadow, and peered through a narrow gap in the covering. What I saw made my stomach clench. The figures had moved closer, now standing at the very edge of the clearing. Each held what appeared to be a long stick, which they used to tap against trees, rocks, and occasionally the ground itself. The rhythm was complex but coordinated, creating a pattern that seemed almost like a form of communication. "I think they're sending a message," I whispered. Howard joined me at the window. "To us? Or to each other?" "I don't know, but listen. It's changing." The rhythm had indeed shifted, becoming faster and more insistent. As it did, the figures began to move, not toward the station as I had feared, but in a circular pattern around the clearing. Their movements were fluid and practiced, like performers in a well-rehearsed ritual. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. In the abrupt silence, a single figure stepped forward from the tree line, taller than the others, its hooded face directed toward the station with unnerving precision. It raised both arms, and in its hands was an object that caught the faint moonlight. A small, intricate construction of twigs and bones similar to what I'd found the previous night, but larger and more complex. The figure placed the object on the ground at the clearing's edge, then stepped back. One by one, the other watchers did the same, creating a circle of these strange totems around the station. "What is this?" Camilla whispered. "Some kind of boundary?" "Or a message," I suggested, remembering the arranged twigs I'd found. "A warning." The last totem placed, the figures retreated to the forest's edge. For a moment, they stood motionless again, a silent semicircle of shadowed forms. Then, with a synchronicity that sent chills through me, they turned and vanished into the darkness of the trees. We remained at our posts, tense and alert, but the watchers did not return. When backup finally arrived, the clearing was empty save for the circle of totems, each one pointing toward the station like an accusing finger. The Forest Service officers were skeptical, despite the physical evidence. They collected the totems for analysis, took statements, and promised increased patrols, but I could see in their eyes that they didn't fully believe our accounts. To them, this was probably just another case of harassment by environmental activists or local troublemakers. But I knew better. We all did. What we had witnessed was something older and more organized than simple vandalism. The precision of their movements, the ritualistic nature of their actions. These spoke of tradition and purpose. As dawn broke over Hollow Grove, casting long shadows across the clearing, I stood at the station window and gazed into the awakening forest. Somewhere beyond those trees, the watchers were waiting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that last night had been merely a prologue, the opening move in a game whose rules and stakes we did not yet understand. The department's official response to the night's events was predictably inadequate. 2 additional rangers were assigned to Pinewood Station, and patrols throughout Hollow Grove were increased. But the underlying message from headquarters was clear. This was a security matter, not the beginning of some forest conspiracy. "They think we're exaggerating," Howard said bitterly after a tense call with regional management. "Or worse, that we panicked over some kids playing pranks." "Kids don't move like that," Ben countered. "What we saw was organized, disciplined." I nodded in agreement, remembering the fluid, almost ceremonial way the watchers had moved. There was purpose behind it, like they were following a script they'd rehearsed many times before. Howard spread a map across the station's main table. I've been comparing our incident with historical reports. There's a pattern emerging. He pointed to several marked locations. Every major encounter with these watchers has occurred within a 5-mile radius of this area. We all leaned in to look. The area Howard indicated was one of the most remote sections of Hollow Grove, a densely forested valley surrounded by steep ridges. According to the map, it contained no trails, no campsites, no infrastructure of any kind. "What's there?" I asked. "Officially, nothing of interest." Howard's finger traced the valley's outline. But local history tells a different story. This valley was considered sacred ground by indigenous peoples. Later, early settlers avoided it completely. There are journal entries describing it as a place where the forest itself seems hostile to human presence. "That's not very scientific," Ben remarked. "Maybe not," Howard conceded. "But there's something else. In the 1930s, a geological survey team went missing while mapping this area. When a search party finally found them weeks later, the survivors were changed. Their reports described people who weren't people living deep in the valley, practicing rituals that defied natural law." "Survivors?" Camilla asked. "How many didn't make it?" 3 out of 5 died before they were found. Official cause was exposure and malnutrition. But the autopsy notes mentioned unusual markings on their bodies, precise patterns of shallow cuts that didn't match any known animal or environmental cause. A heavy silence fell over the room as we absorbed this information. What Howard was suggesting went beyond troublemakers or environmental extremists. He was talking about something persistent and organized that had existed in these woods for generations. "So what do we do?" I finally asked. Howard folded the map deliberately. "We go in. A small team, minimal equipment, no official sanction. We find out what's in that valley." "That's not protocol," Ben objected, though without much conviction. "Protocol hasn't gotten us anywhere," Howard replied. "If the department won't take this seriously, we need to gather evidence they can't ignore." The plan was simple, if reckless. Howard, Camilla, and I would venture into the unmapped valley while Ben maintained our cover at the station, reporting our position as conducting routine maintenance on remote trail markers. We would carry only essential gear, enough for 3 days in the field, and maintain radio contact when possible, though the valley's topography would likely limit transmission. We set out at dawn the following day, taking a little used maintenance trail before veering off into trackless forest. The early morning light filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns that shifted with each breeze. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. As we hiked deeper into Hollow Grove, the forest gradually changed. The trees grew older and more massive, their gnarled trunks covered in thick moss. The undergrowth became sparser, allowing us to move more quietly, but also eliminating cover. If anyone, or anything, was watching, we would be easily spotted. By midday, we reached the ridge overlooking the valley. From our vantage point, it appeared unremarkable, a sea of green stretching to distant slopes, broken occasionally by rock formations and what might have been small clearings. "Doesn't look like much," Camilla observed, lowering her binoculars. "That's the point," Howard replied. "The perfect hiding place is one that doesn't look worth finding." The descent into the valley was arduous, the slope steep and treacherous with loose rocks and exposed roots. Several times we had to backtrack to find passable routes. It was as if the landscape itself was reluctant to grant us entry. When we finally reached level ground, the character of the forest changed again. The trees here were different. Older varieties I didn't recognize, with smooth, pale bark and branches that grew in unnatural formations, almost like deliberate sculptures. The air felt heavier, rich with the scent of decay and something else, an acrid undertone that reminded me of smoke, though we saw no evidence of recent fires. "Check this out," Camilla called softly from several yards ahead, She stood before a massive oak, its trunk wider than all three of us with arms outstretched. Carved into its bark was a symbol, a complex spiral pattern surrounding what looked like a stylized eye. "It's old," Howard said, running his fingers over the carving. "The bark has grown around parts of it, but some sections have been recently refreshed." "A boundary marker?" I suggested. Howard nodded slowly. "I think we've just entered their territory." We continued with heightened caution, moving as quietly as possible through the increasingly strange forest. The usual woodland sounds, bird song, rustling leaves, the occasional scurry of small animals, had diminished to near silence. The only constant was a soft, persistent wind that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carrying whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. Late in the afternoon, we found the first clear evidence of human presence. A narrow path worn through the undergrowth, too regular to be an animal trail. It wound between trees, occasionally marked with small piles of stones or sticks arranged in patterns similar to the totems we'd seen at the station. "Should we follow it?" I asked, eyeing the path with apprehension. Howard hesitated, which was unusual for him. "Yes, but we maintain distance. If this leads to their camp or settlement, we observe only. No contact." The path led us deeper into the valley, gradually descending toward what our map indicated might be a water source. As we walked, I became increasingly aware of subtle changes in our surroundings. Trees with bark stripped in precise patterns, small clearings where the ground had been swept clean of debris, and occasionally, objects hanging from branches. Bundles of feathers, small bones, tarnished metal pieces strung together to create wind chimes that produced discordant notes. "This isn't random," Camilla whispered. "These are markers of some kind. A system. Or a language," I suggested, remembering the rhythmic tapping from the night before. The path eventually opened into a larger clearing dominated by a massive stone formation, a natural outcropping that had been augmented with carefully placed smaller stones to create what appeared to be an altar or platform. The ground around it was bare earth, packed hard by frequent use. "This is a gathering place," Howard said, his voice hushed with both awe and unease. "Look at the wear patterns. People stand here regularly, in formation." We approached cautiously. The stone platform bore markings similar to those we'd seen on trees, but more elaborate. Concentric circles, spiraling lines, and what might have been crude representations of human figures, all deeply carved into the rock surface. "This is old," Howard murmured, tracing one of the carvings. "Centuries, maybe more." "But maintained," Camilla added, pointing to fresher tool marks in certain areas. I circled the platform, studying the ground. "There have been fires here recently, multiple small ones arranged in a pattern around the central stone." Howard was about to respond when a sharp crack echoed through the clearing, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under weight. We froze, scanning the surrounding forest edge. Nothing moved. The forest had gone completely silent, even the persistent wind dying away to leave an unnatural stillness. "We need to go," Howard whispered. "Now." We retreated the way we had come, moving as quietly as possible while maintaining a brisk pace. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming now, a physical pressure that made the hair on my neck stand on end. Another sound reached us, a soft, rhythmic tapping, similar to what we'd heard at the station but more complex, coming from multiple directions at once. It seemed to follow us, always just out of sight beyond the trees. "They're tracking us," Camilla hissed, using the sound to coordinate. We increased our pace, abandoning stealth for speed. The path we'd followed earlier seemed to have shifted somehow, landmarks I'd noted on our approach now out of place or missing entirely. Either we had become disoriented, or the forest itself was changing around us. As twilight approached, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us like grasping hands, we realized we were lost. The ridge that should have been visible to our east was nowhere in sight, and our compass readings made no sense, the needle spinning erratically when we tried to establish direction. "This isn't possible," I muttered, shaking the compass in frustration. "We need to find high ground," Howard decided. "Get our bearings before full dark." We veered toward what appeared to be a slight rise, hoping for a view above the canopy. The tapping had stopped, which somehow felt more threatening than its presence. The silence was expectant, as if the forest was holding its breath. The rise turned out to be the edge of a small ravine, its far side rising steeply to form a natural wall. At the ravine's bottom, partially hidden by fallen logs and decades of leaf litter, was a structure, the remnants of a cabin or shelter, its timber frame still standing though the roof had long since collapsed. "That's not on any map," Howard said, staring at the ruin. "Looks old," Camilla observed. "Trapper's cabin, maybe?" We descended carefully into the ravine, approaching the structure with caution. Up close, it was larger than it had appeared from above. Not a simple cabin, but a more substantial building, its construction unlike the utilitarian shelters typically found in these woods. The timbers were massive and joined with unusual precision, some bearing faded carvings similar to those we'd seen on trees and rocks. This was theirs, I realized. The Watchers, or whoever came before them. Howard nodded slowly. An outpost, maybe, or a temple of some kind. Inside the ruined structure, the ground was surprisingly clear of debris, as if it had been recently swept. In the center was a fire pit, ringed with stones arranged in the now familiar spiral pattern. Beside it lay a collection of objects that made us all pause. Modern items including a Ranger service radio, a digital camera with its casing removed, and several pieces of hiking equipment, all partially disassembled. "These are from recent visitors," Howard said, examining a boot with its sole meticulously separated from the upper. "They're studying our technology." "But why take it apart like this?" Camilla wondered. "To understand how it works," I suggested. "How we work." As I spoke, my flashlight beam caught something on the far wall, a series of markings that didn't match the carvings we'd seen elsewhere. Moving closer, I realized with a jolt that they were photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to the timber with small wooden spikes. They showed rangers, campers, maintenance workers, all people who had entered Hollow Grove over what appeared to be years or even decades, based on the clothing styles and equipment visible in the images. Some photos were recent enough that I recognized the subjects, colleagues from other stations, hikers who had passed through our checkpoint. And among them, pinned centrally as if of special importance, were pictures of us. Howard checking equipment outside Pinewood Station. Camilla on patrol along the eastern ridge. Me, standing at the station window, looking out into the forest. Taken, I realized with a chill, on the night I'd first sensed something watching. "They've been monitoring us all along," Howard whispered. "Learning our patterns, our weaknesses." "Why?" Camilla asked, her voice tight with fear. Before anyone could respond, a sound reached us from outside, the now familiar tapping, but louder and faster than before, coming from all directions at once. With it came voices, low and guttural, speaking words I couldn't understand, but which carried unmistakable purpose and authority. We extinguished our lights immediately, crouching in the darkness of the ruined structure. Through gaps in the timber walls I could see movement. Figures approaching through the gathering darkness, some carrying what appeared to be torches that cast wavering light across the ravine floor. "We're surrounded," Howard breathed, barely audible. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. The figures drew closer, their forms becoming visible in the torchlight. Tall, wrapped in dark garments that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They moved with the same fluid coordination we had witnessed at the station, but here, in what was clearly their domain, There was an added confidence to their movements, a certainty that spoke of absolute control. As they formed a circle around the ruined structure, their tapping reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, a single figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, its hooded face turning slowly as if scanning the building's interior. Though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt the moment its gaze found me, a sensation like ice water flooding my veins. It raised one hand, and in a voice that seemed to resonate from the earth itself, spoke a single word I somehow understood despite its strangeness. Come. Time seemed to stretch and distort in the moments that followed. Howard motioned for us to stay hidden, his expression grim but resolute. Outside, the watchers remained in their perfect circle, torchlight casting their elongated shadows across the ravine floor. The leader who had spoken stood motionless, hand still raised, waiting. Options? Camilla whispered, her voice barely audible. Howard glanced around the ruined structure, assessing our position. Two choices. We stay and hope they leave, or we make a break for it while we still have some visibility. They know we're here, I pointed out. They've been tracking us all day. And they could have ambushed us at any point, Camilla added. But they waited until we found this place. Why? The realization dawned on me slowly. Because they wanted us to see it. The photographs, the dismantled equipment, it's a message. Howard nodded grimly. A demonstration of how much they know about us. About our world. So what do we do? Camilla pressed. Howard was silent for a long moment, weighing invisible options. Finally, he straightened. We talk to them. That's insane, Camilla hissed. Is it? Howard countered. They've had multiple opportunities to harm us, at the station, on the trail, here, but they haven't. They're communicating, in their way. And if you're wrong? I asked. Howard's smile was tight. Then you two run while I create a diversion. Before we could object, he moved toward the entrance, stepping into the open doorway where he would be visible to those outside. I followed close behind, unwilling to let him face this alone. After a moment's hesitation, Camilla joined us. The watchers remained motionless as we emerged, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. Only the leader moved, lowering its outstretched hand and taking a single step forward. We mean no harm, Howard said, his voice steady despite the tension I could feel radiating from him. We're forest rangers. We protect these woods, just as you seem to. The leader tilted its head slightly, a disconcertingly human gesture that somehow emphasized how inhuman the rest of its bearing was. When it spoke again, the words were in English, though heavily accented with sounds I couldn't place. You protect nothing, it said. You bring the destroyers, the takers, the blind ones who see trees as lumber and rivers as sewers. Howard shook his head. That's not true. Our job is conservation, preservation. Your job, the figure interrupted, is to manage, to control, to tame what should remain wild. It gestured toward the forest around us. This place has guardians already. It has had them since before your kind built cities of stone and steel. Who are you? I asked, unable to contain my curiosity despite the danger. The figure turned toward me, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt its attention like a physical weight. We are the Grove, it replied simply. We have always been the Grove. The Sacred Valley, Howard murmured. The place settlers avoided. They were wiser than you, the figure said. They knew when to respect boundaries. Camilla stepped forward slightly. The totems at our station, the markings on trees. They're warnings, aren't they? Boundaries we shouldn't cross. Yes. The figure gestured, and one of the others approached, carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. For generations we have marked the borders of our domain, For generations, your kind has ignored them. The second figure unwrapped the cloth, revealing a collection of small objects. Park service badges, camera lenses, fragments of scientific equipment. Artifacts from those who had ventured too deep into Hollow Grove and never returned. "These belonged to people," Howard said, his voice hardening. "People who disappeared in these woods." "People who trespassed," the leader corrected. "Who came with machines and chemicals and fire, who sought to measure and sample and categorize what cannot be understood through your science." "And you killed them for that?" I asked, horror rising in my throat. The figure was silent for a moment. "Some died. Others were sent away. A few understood and joined us." It gestured to the surrounding watchers. "We are not all born to the grove. Some are chosen." The implications of this statement sent a chill through me. I studied the circle of hooded figures more carefully, wondering how many had once been hikers, researchers, or rangers who had ventured into these woods and never emerged. "What do you want from us?" Howard asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "What we have always wanted," the leader replied. "Distance, respect. The recognition that some places in this world are not meant for your kind's expansion and exploitation." It gestured toward the ravine's edge. "Beyond that ridge lies our true domain, the heart of the Hollow. For centuries we have protected it from those who would destroy it through ignorance or greed. We will continue to do so." "By terrorizing rangers?" Camilla challenged. "By hanging totems and stalking our stations?" "By whatever means necessary," the figure replied without hesitation. "Your presence has expanded. Your trails and campsites encroach further each season. The machines you bring grow louder, more numerous. The visitors you guide leave trash and scars upon the land." "That's not fair," I objected. "We work to minimize impact, to educate visitors." "It is not enough," the leader interrupted, its voice rising for the first time. "It will never be enough so long as your kind views these woods as a resource to be managed rather than a power to be respected." Howard stepped forward, his hands open in a gesture of conciliation. "Then help us understand. Show us what you're protecting. Maybe there's middle ground, a way for both our groups to coexist." The leader was motionless for a long moment, the torchlight reflecting off its hooded form in strange patterns. Then it turned and conferred briefly with several others, their voices too low for us to hear. When it faced us again, its posture had changed subtly, less threatening, though no less imposing. "One of you may see," it declared, "one witness to carry our message back to your people." Howard immediately stepped forward. "I'll go." The leader shook its head. "Not you. The leader stays as surety for the witness's return." It pointed directly at me. "That one. She has eyes that see beyond surfaces." I felt my companions' stares, their surprise matching my own. "Why me?" "You sensed us first," the figure said simply. "You heard the forest's warning when others were deaf to it." Howard gripped my arm. "You don't have to do this." I met his gaze, seeing the concern there, but also understanding. This was why we had come. To learn, to understand what we were facing. And now I was being offered a glimpse behind the veil. "I'll be fine," I told him, with more confidence than I felt. "Keep the radio channel open. I'll report what I can." Howard nodded reluctantly, then turned to the leader. "If she's harmed in any way, she will be returned as she came," the figure interrupted. "Provided she obeys our conditions. She may bring no tools, no weapons, no devices. Only herself and her senses." I surrendered my equipment, radio, flashlight, knife, even my watch, keeping only my clothing. As I prepared to follow the leader, Camilla caught my hand. "Be careful," she whispered, "and remember everything." The leader turned without further discussion and began walking toward the ravine's far side. Two other figures fell in beside me, not touching but close enough to intervene if I tried to flee. The rest remained in their circle around Howard and Camilla. We climbed the ravine's steep wall, using narrow ledges I hadn't noticed during our descent. At the top, the forest changed again, the trees growing impossibly large and ancient, their massive trunks wider than houses, their canopies forming a cathedral-like space high above. The ground beneath them was largely clear of undergrowth, covered instead with a carpet of moss that glowed faintly with bioluminescent organisms. The natural light was sufficient that even without my flashlight, I could see our path clearly, a winding route between the giant trees, marked occasionally with the now familiar spiral symbols carved into bark or stone. "What are these markings?" I asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over our small procession. The leader glanced back. "They are words in a language older than speech. They tell those who can read them about the power that flows through this place." "Power? You mean like spiritual energy?" A sound emerged from beneath the hood, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Your kind always needs labels, categories, spiritual, scientific, natural, supernatural. The boundaries you create do not exist in reality." We walked in silence after that, the distance impossible to gauge in the strange twilight forest. Time seemed to flow differently here, minutes stretching or contracting unpredictably. I focused on memorizing landmarks, trying to maintain some sense of direction, but the landscape defied such efforts. Trees that should have been behind us appeared ahead. Clearings we crossed seemed to circle back on themselves. Finally, we emerged at the edge of a vast depression in the earth, a natural amphitheater nearly half a mile across. At its center stood a formation that defied immediate comprehension. A circle of massive standing stones, each carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as I watched. Between them grew what appeared to be a single enormous tree, its multiple trunks twisting around each other to form a central column before spreading into a canopy that covered the entire circle. "The heart," the leader said simply, gesturing toward the formation. "What is it?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away. "It is the oldest living thing in this forest, perhaps in this part of the world. It was ancient when the first humans came to these lands. It has witnessed the rise and fall of nations, the changing of the earth itself." As we descended into the amphitheater, I became aware of subtle details I hadn't noticed from above. Smaller stones arranged in patterns radiating outward from the central circle, areas where the ground had been carefully shaped to form terraces, and most surprisingly, evidence of habitation. Structures were built into the landscape so seamlessly that they were nearly invisible until we were upon them. Dwellings formed from living trees bent and shaped over generations, their interiors illuminated by the same bioluminescent moss that lit our path. People moved among these dwellings, actual people, not the hooded figures who had escorted me. They wore simple clothing of leather and woven plant fibers, and they paused in their activities to watch our approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "Your community," I said, understanding dawning. "You live here permanently." The leader nodded. "For countless generations, we are the grove's caretakers and its defenders." "And the hooded figures? The watchers?" "Our guardians. Those who patrol the boundaries and enforce our separation from the outside world." We approached the central tree, and up close, its scale was even more overwhelming. The combined trunks at its base must have been 30 feet in diameter, the bark deeply furrowed and covered in places with the spiral carvings I'd seen throughout the forest. "Why show me this?" I asked, turning to the leader. It reached up and, for the first time, lowered its hood. The face revealed was surprisingly ordinary, human, weathered by age and elements, with deep lines around the eyes and mouth that spoke of both hardship and laughter. An elderly woman with silver-white hair tied in complex braids gazed back at me, her eyes a startling amber color that reflected the bioluminescent light around us. Because you must understand what you threaten, she said, her voice clearer now without the hood's muffling effect. This is not just a place. It is a living system, one that has existed in balance for millennia. The heart regulates the entire forest, its water, its soil, the very air you breathe. She gestured toward the standing stones. These were placed by our ancestors when they first found this valley and recognized its importance. They channel and direct the energy that flows from the heart, distributing it throughout Hollow Grove and beyond. Energy? I repeated, skepticism creeping into my voice despite the wonders around me. The woman's expression hardened slightly. Call it what you will, life force, biological field. The name matters less than the reality. She touched the massive trunk beside us. This organism produces compounds found nowhere else on Earth. It purifies water, enriches soil, generates airborne spores that protect surrounding plants from disease. You're saying it's some kind of super tree? A biological anomaly? I'm saying it's the keystone of an ecosystem your science barely comprehends. She pointed toward the forest beyond the amphitheater. Your logging operations to the north have already damaged some of its root system. Your campgrounds to the east bring hundreds of feet that compact the soil and disrupt fungal networks. The chemicals visitors leave behind, sunscreen, insect repellent, cleaning products, accumulate in the watershed. I thought of the environmental impact studies the Forest Service conducted, the conservation efforts we prided ourselves on. We try to minimize. You cannot minimize what you do not understand, she interrupted. Your people see individual trees, individual species. You miss the connections, the relationships, the whole. She led me around the massive trunk to where a section of bark had been damaged, revealing the wood beneath. Unlike any tree I'd seen, the exposed layers pulsed with faint light, a rhythmic illumination like a heartbeat. It is dying, she said simply. Slowly, but inevitably, unless the encroachment stops. And if it dies? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Then Hollow Grove dies with it. The water turns toxic, the soil sterile, the air filled with pathogens usually kept in check. And then the decay spreads beyond the forest, to the farmlands, the towns, the cities that depend on the watershed. I stared at the pulsing light within the ancient tree, trying to process the implications. Why not tell someone, scientists, researchers, people who could study it, protect it properly? Her laugh was bitter. We have tried. Over generations, we have revealed ourselves to those we thought might understand. Some listened, but more sought to take samples, specimens, knowledge they could use for their own purposes. And those who believed us were dismissed as superstitious or insane by your authorities. She gestured toward the community around us. So we withdrew, protected what we could, became the Grove's defenders when no one else would stand for it. The missing hikers, I said. The researchers who disappeared. Those who would not listen to warnings. Her expression was unapologetic. We did what was necessary to protect something far larger than individual lives. I wanted to argue, to defend the principles of conservation and managed protection that had guided my career. But standing in this hidden valley, faced with evidence of an ecosystem far more complex than anything in our textbooks, my certainty wavered. What do you want from me? I asked finally. From the Forest Service? Retreat, she said simply. Abandon the new trails being cut into the northern ridges. Remove the campgrounds from the eastern watershed. Establish a true conservation zone, not for human recreation, but for the forest itself. That's a lot to ask. There are policies, regulations. There is survival, she interrupted. Yours as well as ours. She gestured toward the living community around us. We have protected the heart for generations. We will continue to do so, by any means necessary, but the pressure increases each year. The damage spreads. We cannot hold back the tide of your world forever. She fixed me with those amber eyes, their intensity almost physical. You asked to understand. Now you do. The choice of what happens next lies with you and your people. As the implications of her words sank in, I realized the magnitude of what I'd been shown, and the responsibility that came with it. I was being asked to carry a message that would be difficult for many to believe, much less act upon. Yet the evidence surrounded me, undeniable in its alien wonder. I'll try, I promised, but I can't guarantee anyone will listen. Then make them listen, she replied, her voice hard as stone. Because if they don't, what comes next will not be warnings or demonstrations. She gestured toward the heart. It will be the grove defending itself in ways your world is not prepared to face. With those words hanging between us, she raised her hood once more, transforming back into the otherworldly figure that had led me through the forest. Around us, the community had gathered, watching in silence, their faces showing the same resolve I saw in their leader's posture. It is time for you to return, she said, to carry our message. As we began the journey back through the ancient forest, I felt the weight of what I'd witnessed pressing down on me like a physical burden. I had come seeking answers about the Watchers in the woods and found something far more profound, a hidden world within our world. A community with an unbroken connection to the land that made our own conservation efforts seem shallow and superficial by comparison. And with that knowledge came a terrible question. When I returned to my own people, what would I tell them? And more importantly, would they listen before it was too late? The return journey passed in a blur of twisted paths and shifting shadows. My escort, the leader and two silent guardians, moved with practiced efficiency through terrain that would have left me hopelessly lost had I been alone. Despite my best efforts to memorize landmarks, the forest seemed to reconfigure itself around us, familiar features appearing in unexpected places or vanishing altogether. We reached the ravine as dawn broke, pale light filtering through the canopy to cast long shadows across the forest floor. Howard and Camilla waited where we had left them, tense and alert, their faces showing equal measures of relief and concern when they spotted me descending the ravine wall. "Are you all right?" Howard asked immediately, scanning me for injuries. I nodded, though all right hardly captured my mental state. "I'm unharmed, but we need to talk, privately." The leader of the grove stepped forward, addressing Howard directly. "Your witness has seen what few outsiders ever have. She carries our message and our warning. The choice of what follows rests with your people." Howard's expression remained carefully neutral. "And if we choose cooperation? If we listen to your concerns? Then perhaps there can be peace between the grove and your kind." The leader's voice revealed nothing of the woman I had glimpsed beneath the hood. "But know this. We have protected our domain for centuries against threats far greater than your Forest Service. We will continue to do so, regardless of your decision." With that pronouncement, she stepped back, and the Watchers began to disperse, melting into the forest with uncanny silence until only the leader remained. 3 days, she said. "We will await your response for 3 days. After that, we will act as we must." Then she too was gone, vanishing among the trees as if she had never been. For a long moment, we stood in silence, processing what had just occurred. Then Camilla broke the spell. "What happened? What did you see?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how incredible my experience would sound. "It's complicated. We need to get back to the station first. Document everything while it's fresh." Howard studied my face. "You saw something that changed your perspective." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Everything we thought we knew about Hollow Grove, it's just the surface. there's a whole world beneath that we've been blind to. We gathered our equipment and began the journey back, moving with greater urgency than before. As we hiked, I shared fragments of what I had witnessed: the hidden community, the ancient tree they called the heart, the ecological system they had protected for generations. Howard and Camilla listened without interruption, though I could see the skepticism in their expressions. "I know how it sounds," I acknowledged as we paused to rest near a stream. "If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it either." "It's not that we don't believe you," Camilla said carefully. "It's just hard to reconcile with what we know about forest ecosystems." "That's exactly the point," I insisted. "Our knowledge is incomplete. The Grove has been studying these woods for generations, living in harmony with systems we're only beginning to understand scientifically." Howard had been quiet, processing the information methodically. "If what you saw is real, and I'm not saying it isn't, it represents a conservation challenge unlike anything the department has faced before." "More than a challenge," I corrected. "An ultimatum. They want us to abandon the northern trails, remove the eastern campgrounds, create a true conservation zone around their territory." "That's not going to happen," Camilla said flatly. "Those projects represent millions in funding and years of planning. The department won't just scrap them because of a threat from forest dwellers, no matter how ancient their claim." Howard's expression was troubled. "And if we don't comply, these watchers will what? Continue harassing our stations? Sabotaging equipment?" I remembered the amber-eyed woman's final warning. "I think it would be worse than that. Much worse." We reached Pinewood Station late that afternoon, exhausted and strained. Word of our unauthorized expedition had reached headquarters, and a district supervisor was waiting for us, his government-issue SUV parked prominently in front of the station. 3 rangers missing for nearly 24 hours. Supervisor Davidson greeted us, his voice tight with anger. "No authorized expedition plan, no proper check-ins, just a vague message about trail maintenance that no one believed. Do you have any idea of the resources we've wasted searching for you?" Howard stepped forward, taking responsibility. "It was my decision, sir. I'll accept whatever disciplinary action is appropriate, but we have information that couldn't wait for official channels." Davidson's expression didn't soften. "This better be good, Howard. Your reputation only carries so much weight." Inside the station, we laid out everything we had learned, the evidence we'd gathered, the photographs of totems and markings, and my account of what I'd witnessed in the hidden valley. As I spoke, Davidson's expression shifted from skepticism to outright disbelief. "Let me get this straight," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "You're claiming there's a secret community living in an unmapped valley, protecting a magical tree that somehow controls the entire ecosystem of Hollow Grove." "Not magical," I corrected. "Biological. A keystone species with properties we haven't cataloged or understood." "And these Grove people," Davidson continued, his tone making it clear what he thought of the term, "have been here for centuries, occasionally abducting hikers and researchers who venture too close to their territory." Howard stepped in. "The evidence supports it, sir. The pattern of disappearances over decades, the consistent reports of hooded figures, the territorial markings, it all fits." Davidson leaned back, studying us with a mixture of disappointment and concern. "What fits is that you 3 have let forest legends and isolation affect your judgment. These watchers are almost certainly eco-activists or possibly a local cult using intimidation tactics to scare people away from parts of the forest." "With all due respect, sir," I pressed, "what I saw goes beyond anything activists could fabricate. The community, the modified ecosystem, the biological anomalies, these require generations of presence and knowledge." "What you think you saw," Davidson corrected. "After hiking miles through difficult terrain with minimal rest, under significant stress." The human mind is remarkably good at finding patterns and creating narratives, especially in unfamiliar environments. His dismissal stung, but it wasn't unexpected. How could anyone believe such an account without seeing what I had seen? "What about their ultimatum?" Camilla asked. "Whether you believe their claims or not, they've made a clear threat. 3 days before they take action against the northern trails and eastern campgrounds." Davidson's expression hardened. "Threats against federal land and facilities are a criminal matter. I'm bringing in law enforcement specialists and additional security personnel. If these watchers show themselves again, they'll be apprehended and prosecuted." "That's exactly the wrong approach," I argued. "Escalation will only provoke them. They've been defending their territory for generations. They won't back down because we bring in more rangers with guns." "That's enough," Davidson snapped. "You three are on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. I'm bringing in a replacement team for Pinewood Station effective immediately." Howard stood, his posture rigid with suppressed anger. "You're making a mistake, sir. At least send a scientific team to investigate the valley. If Nora's wrong, no harm done. If she's right, we could be facing an ecological discovery of unprecedented importance." For a moment, Davidson seemed to consider this. Then he shook his head. "The department's resources are already stretched thin. I'm not diverting a research team based on campfire stories and stress-induced hallucinations." With that dismissal, the meeting effectively ended. Davidson instructed us to pack our personal belongings and report to regional headquarters the following morning for debriefing. As we gathered our things, the reality of our failure settled over me like a physical weight. "He's not going to do anything, is he?" I asked Howard as we stood in the station's back room, away from Davidson's hearing. Howard's expression was grim. "Not what needs to be done. He'll increase security, maybe send some rangers to check the areas we mentioned, but he won't take the Grove's warning seriously." "So what do we do?" Camilla asked, her earlier skepticism now tempered by concern. Howard was silent for a long moment. "We have 3 days," he finally said. 3 days to find someone who will listen." That night, in a motel on the outskirts of the nearest town, we gathered in Howard's room to form a plan. The administrative leave that was meant to silence us had instead freed us to act without official constraints. "We need evidence," Howard began, spreading a map across the bed. "Something concrete that even Davidson can't dismiss." "The photographs from the ruined structure," Camilla suggested. "The ones showing they've been watching rangers and visitors for years." I shook my head. "We didn't retrieve any, and even if we had, Davidson would just say they were taken by ordinary people, activists or cultists, not some ancient forest community." "What about the heart?" Howard asked. "You said it had unique biological properties. If we could get samples, have them analyzed independently." "They'd never let us near it again," I pointed out. "And I'm not sure we could even find our way back to the valley without their guidance. The forest seemed to shift around us." We continued brainstorming late into the night, each idea seeming less feasible than the last. The fundamental problem remained. How do you prove the existence of something that has successfully remained hidden for centuries? As dawn approached, I stood at the motel window, watching the first hint of light touch the distant outline of Hollow Grove. An idea had been forming, one I was reluctant to voice because of its implications. "What if we don't try to convince Davidson?" I finally said, turning back to my exhausted colleagues. "What if we go directly to the people who would be most affected by what's coming?" Howard looked up, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The construction crews, the contractors working on the northern trails and eastern campgrounds." I nodded. "The Grove said they'd act in 3 days if they didn't get a response. If those workers are still there when that happens, we can't just tell them there's a magical tree and forest people," Camilla objected. "They'll dismiss us as quickly as Davidson did." "We don't need them to believe everything," I explained. "Just enough to make them cautious. to perhaps delay the work until we can find someone with actual authority who will listen. Howard was already reaching for his phone. I know the project manager for the Northern Trail expansion. Worked with him last year on the western section. He might at least hear us out. What followed was a day of desperate networking, calling in favors, and occasionally bending the truth. We told contractors about unstable geological conditions we'd discovered, warned camp developers about potentially toxic biological agents in the watershed, and hinted to equipment operators about ongoing security concerns that might endanger their personnel. By nightfall, we had managed to create enough doubt and concern that several project leaders had agreed to brief operational pauses, not cancellations, but temporary delays to reassess safety conditions. It wasn't the retreat the Grove had demanded, but it might buy us the time we needed to find more permanent solutions. It's not enough, I admitted as we reconvened in the motel room. These are just delays. Once Davidson brings in his security team and finds nothing, work will resume. It's all we could do with the time and resources we have, Howard said, though he looked no happier than I felt. Camilla, who had been quieter than usual all day, finally spoke up. There's another option we haven't discussed. She hesitated, then continued. We could go public. Take this story to the media, to environmental groups, to anyone who might listen. Howard frowned. That would end our careers. And without concrete evidence, most reputable outlets wouldn't touch the story anyway. But social media might, I pointed out, warming to Camilla's suggestion. Footage of the totems, the markings, our testimonies about what we experienced. It might create enough public interest to force a proper investigation. Or it might just label us as conspiracy theorists, Howard countered. And if it fails, we lose whatever credibility we have left. The debate continued late into the night. Each option weighed and found wanting. In the end, exhaustion made the decision for us. We would rest, and in the morning, proceed with both approaches, continuing to delay the development projects while also preparing a carefully documented account for potential public release. As I drifted toward uneasy sleep, my thoughts returned to the amber-eyed woman and her final warning. Whatever we decided, I feared it would not be enough. The Grove had protected its domain for centuries against all manner of threats. They would not be deterred by project delays or media attention. They would act as they had always acted, decisively and without compromise. And when they did, I could only hope that the world was ready for what would follow. Dawn broke with a sense of foreboding that seemed to permeate the air itself. Outside our motel, the sky hung low and heavy with dark clouds that threatened rain, but withheld it, creating a pressure that made my head throb. It felt like the moments before a severe storm, when electricity builds in the atmosphere and every living thing seeks shelter. I had slept poorly, my dreams filled with twisted paths through endless trees and amber eyes watching from shadows. When I joined Howard and Camilla for breakfast in the motel's small dining area, their haggard expressions suggested they had fared no better. 2 days left, Howard said without preamble, pushing a cup of coffee toward me. I nodded, accepting the bitter liquid gratefully. Assuming they hold to their timeline. Assuming they exist at all, Camilla added, though her tone lacked conviction. Whatever doubts she had harbored were eroding in the face of our shared experiences and mounting tension. We spent the morning finalizing our two-pronged approach. Howard would continue working his contacts in the development projects, reinforcing the need for caution. Camilla would compile our documentation into a format suitable for public consumption, including photographs, GPS coordinates, and our personal testimonies. I would attempt one last official channel. Dr. Eleanor Winters, a respected ecologist who had conducted research in Hollow Grove years earlier, and might be receptive to our claims. As we prepared to separate for our respective tasks, Howard's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened to the caller. When? He asked sharply. How many? Another pause. No, keep everyone back. Don't let anyone approach until I get there. He ended the call and looked at us, his face grim. That was Jimenez, the Northern Trail project manager. There's been an incident at the construction site. All the equipment, excavators, bulldozers, everything has been disabled overnight. Vandalism? Camilla asked. Howard shook his head. Not exactly. Jimenez said the machines were poisoned. His word. Some kind of organic material has been introduced into the fuel systems, engines, hydraulics. It's spread throughout the metal components like a fungus, corroding everything it touches. The Grove, I whispered. They're not waiting 3 days. That's not all, Howard continued. The workers found markings at the site, the same spiral patterns we've seen carved into trees surrounding the clearing. And there are objects hanging from branches, arrangements of bones and wood, dozens of them. A chill ran through me despite the warm morning. Warnings. They're escalating their message. Or it's the local environmentalists taking advantage of the folklore, Camilla suggested, though she sounded uncertain. It could be a copycat action. Either way, we need to see it, I insisted. If it is the Grove, there might be signs that could help us understand what they're planning next. We drove to the northern construction site in tense silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The road wound through increasingly dense forest, following the contours of hills that would eventually lead to the unmapped valley we had discovered. About a mile from the site, we encountered the first roadblock, Forest Service vehicles and a county sheriff's deputy turning away traffic. Howard showed his ranger identification, explaining we had information relevant to the incident. After a brief radio consultation, the deputy waved us through with a warning to stay within the designated investigation area. The construction site itself was a scene of controlled chaos. What had once been a neat clearing carved from the forest was now a jumble of disabled machinery, concerned workers, and various officials attempting to make sense of the situation. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off certain areas, particularly around the heavy equipment. Howard! A man in a hard hat and reflective vest approached us, his expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. Glad you're here. This is beyond anything I've dealt with before. Jimenez, Howard greeted him with a firm handshake. What exactly happened? The project manager led us toward the nearest piece of equipment, a massive excavator now sitting idle. Crew arrived at 6 a.m. to start work. Machines wouldn't start. Not just one or two, every single piece of equipment on site. When mechanics opened them up, he gestured for us to look. Inside the excavator's engine compartment was something that defied immediate comprehension. What should have been clean metal components were covered in a network of reddish-brown growths that resembled a cross between fungus and root systems. The material had spread throughout the engine, wrapping around parts and penetrating seals and gaskets. What is that? Camilla asked, leaning closer but careful not to touch. No idea, Jimenez admitted. Never seen anything like it. It's in the fuel tanks, hydraulic systems, even the electrical components. And it's still spreading. You can watch it grow if you stare long enough. I studied the growth, remembering the bioluminescent organisms I had seen in the hidden valley. Has anyone analyzed it? Taken samples? Hazmat team is on the way, Jimenez replied. Until then, we're under orders not to disturb it. Whatever it is, it's already eaten through some pretty tough materials. No one's eager to get it on their skin. Howard gestured toward the forest edge. And the markings you mentioned? Jimenez's expression darkened further. Yeah, those. Come see for yourself. He led us to the perimeter of the clearing where the trees began. Every trunk along the boundary had been marked with the now familiar spiral pattern, but these were different from those we had seen before. Larger, more complex, and carved deep enough to expose the living tissue beneath the bark. Sap oozed from the wounds, but instead of the clear or amber liquid typical of these species, it was dark red, almost black, with an acrid smell that made my eyes water. "This wasn't here yesterday," Jimenez said, keeping his distance from the marked trees. "We had crews working right up to this line, clearing underbrush. Nobody saw these symbols." "And the hanging objects?" Howard prompted. Jimenez pointed farther along the tree line. "All around the perimeter, spaced about 20 feet apart." We followed the edge of the clearing and soon spotted them, small bundles suspended from branches by what looked like braided plant fibers. Each bundle was uniquely constructed but followed a similar pattern: a central core of wood or bone surrounded by smaller objects: feathers, teeth, fragments of metal and glass, and in some cases, items I recognized as pieces of modern equipment: watch batteries, memory card fragments, tiny gears from precision instruments. "Have you touched any of these?" I asked, studying the nearest bundle without approaching it. "Hell no," Jimenez replied emphatically. "After what happened to our equipment, no one's touching anything that wasn't here yesterday." As we continued around the perimeter, I noticed something Jimenez hadn't mentioned: subtle changes in the forest itself. The undergrowth nearest the clearing appeared different from what I remembered from previous visits: denser, more vivid in color, with species that seemed unfamiliar or strangely altered. Some plants had grown with unnatural speed, their newest growth visibly different in structure and hue. "The forest is changing," I murmured, more to myself than my companions. Howard heard me. "What do you mean?" I pointed to several examples. "These species shouldn't be growing together. And look at the color of those leaves. That's not natural for this elevation or season. It's as if..." "As if what?" Camilla prompted when I trailed off. "As if the forest is adapting, responding to a threat by accelerating its evolution." Jimenez looked at me like I had grown a second head. "Trees don't respond like that. They don't change overnight." "Normally, no," I agreed. "But what if they were being influenced by something that could alter their growth patterns? Something like the heart." Howard pulled me aside, lowering his voice. "You think this is connected to what you saw in the valley? The organism they were protecting?" I nodded. "They said it influenced the entire ecosystem. What if these changes are just the beginning? A demonstration of what they can do if pushed further?" Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of additional vehicles: Forest Service SUVs and what appeared to be a mobile laboratory unit. Supervisor Davidson emerged from the lead vehicle, his expression thunderous as he spotted us. "I specifically placed you three on administrative leave," he said without preamble. What part of stay away from Forest Service operations was unclear. "We have relevant information about what's happening here," Howard replied calmly. "Information you dismissed yesterday that now seems pretty damn pertinent." Davidson's eyes narrowed. "If you're implying your forest dweller theory explains this vandalism..." "It's not vandalism," I interrupted. "Not in the conventional sense. And it's not just a theory anymore." I gestured toward the disabled equipment. "Have you ever seen anything like that growth before? Do you have any explanation for how it appeared simultaneously in every piece of machinery overnight?" For a moment, Davidson's certainty wavered. "The investigation is ongoing. Until we have scientific analysis. By then, it might be too late," I pressed. "This is just the first demonstration. The Grove warned us they would act if their demands weren't met. This is them showing what they're capable of." "The Grove," Davidson repeated, skepticism returning to his voice. "Your mythical forest community." Howard stepped forward. "Mythical or not, something disabled millions of dollars of equipment in a single night without being detected. Something carved identical symbols into dozens of trees simultaneously. If you have a better explanation, we're all eager to hear it." Before Davidson could respond, a commotion arose from the newly arrived laboratory unit. A technician in protective gear was calling for the supervisor with evident urgency. "Stay here," Davidson ordered us, then strode toward the disturbance. We exchanged glances, then by unspoken agreement moved closer, positioning ourselves within earshot of the conversation. "Never seen anything like it," the technician was saying, gesturing toward equipment readings on a tablet. "It's not a known fungus or bacteria. The cellular structure is completely novel, and it's demonstrating properties that should be impossible." "Meaning what exactly?" Davidson demanded. "Meaning it's breaking down and restructuring inorganic materials at the molecular level," the technician explained. "Essentially converting metal and plastic into organic compounds that it can use for further growth. And it's doing it at a rate that defies current biological understanding." Davidson's posture stiffened. "Can it be contained? Eliminated?" "Unknown at this stage. We've tried standard fungicides, acids, even fire on samples. It either resists or adapts rapidly. And there's something else." The technician hesitated. "It appears to be communicating." "Communicating," Davidson repeated flatly. "Different colonies are showing synchronized growth patterns despite physical separation. They're responding to stimuli as a unified organism despite being spread across multiple machines. It's as if they're networked somehow." I turned to Howard, my voice low but urgent. "It's the heart. It has to be. The Grove has introduced something from their central organism into our technology. A demonstration of what they can do on a larger scale if provoked." "If you're right," Howard replied grimly, "then this is just the beginning. A taste of what might happen if development continues." Davidson returned, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. "The site is being quarantined pending further investigation. All personnel will undergo decontamination procedures before leaving." "And the development project?" Howard asked. "Temporarily suspended, obviously." Davidson's gaze shifted to me. "You said this was a demonstration, that there were demands. What exactly does this Grove want?" The shift in his tone, from dismissive to cautiously receptive, was subtle but significant. For the first time, he was treating our account as potentially valid. "Abandonment of the Northern Trail expansion," I replied promptly. "Removal of the eastern campgrounds. Establishment of a true conservation zone around their territory, with no human access." Davidson's expression tightened. "That's not happening. The department has millions invested in these projects, commitments to stakeholders, contracts with developers." "Then prepare for worse than this," I warned. "What we're seeing here is restrained, a warning shot. If they decide to unleash the full capacity of whatever biological agent they're using..." I let the implication hang in the air, made all the more ominous by the disabled machinery surrounding us and the strange growths advancing through their components. "I need to consult with department leadership," Davidson said finally. "In the meantime, you three are no longer on administrative leave. Consider yourselves temporarily reassigned to this investigation. Your unique perspective may prove useful." It wasn't full vindication, but it was a start. As Davidson walked away to make his calls, Camilla turned to us with a grim smile. "Well, that's progress. He's at least considering the possibility we're not completely delusional." "Only took a biological impossibility to convince him," Howard remarked dryly. I didn't share their momentary relief. Looking around at the altered forest edge, the contaminated machinery, the increasingly agitated personnel trying to understand what they were facing, I felt only a deepening sense of dread. "This isn't over," I said quietly. "Not by a long shot. The Grove gave us 3 days. This is just day 1. As if in response to my words, a sudden wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a scent I recognized from the hidden valley, earthy and ancient, with that same acrid undertone. The hanging bundles swayed in unison, their components clicking together to create a sound like distant rhythmic tapping. The forest was speaking, and its message was clear. This was merely the prelude to what would come if humans continued to encroach upon its domain. By evening, news of the Hollow Grove incident had spread beyond the Forest Service to local media. Initial reports described it as vandalism or sabotage, but as preliminary findings from the scientific team leaked out, the narrative began to shift. Words like unknown biological agent and unprecedented contamination replaced the earlier, simpler explanations. Davidson had established a command center at the Ranger headquarters, where officials from various agencies gathered to assess the situation and coordinate responses. Howard, Camilla, and I found ourselves in the unusual position of being both recently disciplined employees and suddenly essential consultants, our first-hand knowledge of the Grove now valued where it had been dismissed just days earlier. The Eastern Campground Development has reported similar incidents, Davidson informed us as we gathered around a map table. Equipment failures, strange growths in fuel systems, marking on trees. Not as extensive as the northern site, but following the same pattern. And the 3-day countdown continues, Howard reminded everyone. Whatever happened last night is likely just the beginning. A scientist from the Forest Health Protection Division cleared her throat. We've completed preliminary analysis of samples from the affected equipment. The organic material appears to be a previously undocumented fungal species with properties more commonly associated with slime molds, the ability to network, communicate, and solve problems collectively. Can it be contained? Davidson asked. We're working on that, she replied. But its adaptability is concerning. Treatments that initially seemed effective were overcome within hours as the organism modified its structure. Like an immune response, I suggested. She nodded. Exactly like that. Whatever this is, it learns. The implications hung heavy in the room. An organism that could disable machinery, resist countermeasures, and potentially spread to other systems posed a threat beyond mere vandalism or protest. What about the carved symbols? Camilla asked. Has anyone analyzed the sap coming from those trees? Initial tests show elevated levels of compounds not normally found in these species, another scientist reported. Some appear to be signaling molecules, others have properties similar to growth hormones. The trees are essentially being reprogrammed at a cellular level. I thought of the heart and its pulsing interior, the community that had protected it for generations. This fits with what I saw in the valley. The Grove spoke of an organism that regulated the entire forest ecosystem, something that could influence plant growth, soil composition, even the behavior of other organisms. Davidson, who had been studying the map intently, looked up. Assuming, and I'm not fully convinced yet, that this hidden community exists and is responsible for these incidents, what's their endgame? What happens after their 3-day deadline if we don't meet their demands? I hesitated, trying to find words that would convey the gravity of the situation without sounding apocalyptic. Based on what I was told, they view themselves as the forest's immune system. When threatened, they respond with increasing force until the threat is eliminated. Meaning what exactly? Davidson pressed. Meaning this is just the beginning, I said quietly. The disabled equipment, the altered trees, these are localized responses, warnings. If pushed further, they could potentially introduce similar agents into water systems, soil, even the air. The Grove has been developing biological tools for generations, adapting them specifically to defend their territory. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Finally, Davidson spoke again, his voice carefully controlled. So, what are our options? We can't simply abandon federal land because of threats, no matter how unusual. Could we negotiate? Howard suggested. Find a compromise that protects their core territory while allowing limited development in less sensitive areas. I shook my head. They've tried that approach in the past, according to their leader. Each compromise eventually led to further encroachment. They no longer trust partial measures. Then what do you suggest? Davidson asked, frustration evident in his voice. A full scientific assessment, I replied without hesitation. Bring in experts in ecology, biology, anthropology. Let them document what exists in that valley, the community, the heart, the entire system. If what I saw is verified, it would justify extraordinary conservation measures on scientific grounds alone. That would take months to organize properly, Davidson objected. Then we need a temporary solution, Howard interjected. A good faith gesture while we arrange the full assessment. Halt all development projects in the disputed areas, establish a no-entry zone around the valley, and communicate our intentions to the Grove. Communicate how? Camilla asked. It's not like they have a phone number or email address. I thought for a moment. They'll be watching, they always are. But we could also leave messages at the boundary markers, using their own symbol system. They'll understand. Davidson looked unconvinced, but running out of alternatives. I'll need authorization from the regional director for any official response. But given the circumstances, I believe I can secure temporary suspensions of the development projects, for safety reasons, if nothing else. It wasn't the full acknowledgement of the Grove's legitimacy that I had hoped for, but it was a start, a recognition that something extraordinary was happening in Hollow Grove, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away by conventional thinking. As the meeting continued, plans were developed for securing the affected sites, documenting the biological anomalies, and presenting a case to senior leadership for a more comprehensive scientific investigation. Through it all, I felt a growing sense that we were standing at a threshold between worlds, the ordered, managed approach of our Forest Service and the ancient, mysterious systems of the Grove. By midnight, Davidson had secured the temporary development freeze we had requested. It wasn't presented as a response to demands, but rather as a safety precaution given the unknown biological agent affecting the sites. Still, it represented the first step toward the recognition the Grove had sought for generations. How do we let them know? Davidson asked as we finalized the plans. Assuming they're real and watching as you claim. I'll go, I said simply. Back to the boundary markers we found. I'll bring the message personally. Davidson frowned. That's not protocol. Protocol isn't equipped for this situation, I interrupted. They showed themselves to me once. They might do so again, especially if I come alone and unarmed. After considerable debate, a compromise was reached. I would approach the boundary area at dawn, accompanied by Howard but no one else. We would carry documentation of the development suspension and a formal request for a meeting between Forest Service representatives and Grove leaders to discuss longer-term solutions. As we prepared for this unusual diplomatic mission, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically my understanding of Hollow Grove had changed in just a few days. The forest I had thought I knew, a resource to be managed, protected through human intervention, had revealed itself as something far more complex and autonomous. It didn't need our protection. It had its own defenders who had preserved its most vital systems for centuries, while we remained oblivious to their existence. Dawn found Howard and I at the edge of the forest, following the now familiar path toward the ravine where we had first encountered the Grove's representatives. The forest felt different this morning, more aware somehow, as if every tree and plant had become a sensory organ for some larger intelligence. Do you think they'll show themselves? Howard asked as we walked, his voice hushed despite the open terrain. I don't know, I admitted, but they'll know we're here. They'll understand why we've come. We reached the ravine as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The ruined structure where we had found the photographs still stood, though it seemed changed somehow, more integrated with the surrounding vegetation, as if the forest was gradually reclaiming it. I approached the clearing before it, Howard hanging back slightly as we had agreed. From my pack, I withdrew the documents we had brought, maps showing the suspended development areas, letters from Davidson outlining the proposed scientific assessment, and a personal note I had written, attempting to translate our intentions into terms the Grove might understand. Arranging these items on a flat stone at the clearing's edge, I then gathered small branches and arranged them in a pattern I had seen in the hidden valley. a simple spiral surrounding a central point, the closest thing to a greeting I could manage in their symbolic language. "Now what?" Howard asked from his position several yards back. "Now we wait," I replied, settling on a fallen log at the clearing's edge. "And listen." The forest was quiet, but not silent. Birds called from the canopy, insects hummed in the undergrowth, and occasionally, a breeze would stir the leaves, creating a gentle susurration that seemed almost like distant voices. I focused on these sounds, trying to distinguish patterns, meanings, anything that might indicate a response to our presence. An hour passed, then another. Howard shifted restlessly but maintained his position. I remained still, watching and listening with a patience I hadn't known I possessed. Then, so gradually I almost missed it, the quality of the forest sounds began to change. The random calls and movements coalesced into something more rhythmic, more deliberate. It reminded me of the tapping we had heard before, but translated into the forest's own voice, a communication method that used the environment itself as its medium. "Something's happening," I whispered to Howard, who nodded tensely, his eyes scanning the tree line. The rhythmic sounds intensified, focusing on the clearing where we waited. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, they were there. Figures emerging from the forest as if they had materialized from the trees themselves. 3 of them, hooded and silent, standing at the opposite edge of the clearing. I recognized the central figure immediately, the leader who had shown me her face, the amber-eyed woman who spoke for the grove. She stepped forward, her movements fluid and deliberate, and approached the stone where I had left our offerings. For long minutes, she examined the documents, occasionally touching the paper as if assessing its very composition. Finally, she raised her head to look directly at me. "You bring promises," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Written in your language, bound by your customs." "We bring the beginning of understanding," I replied carefully. "A recognition that there is something in these woods worth protecting beyond what we previously knew." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You suspend your destruction temporarily. You propose to study us like specimens. This is not recognition. It is merely curiosity pausing to examine what it does not yet comprehend. It's all we can offer right now," I admitted. "But it could lead to more. If scientists document what I saw, the heart, its influence on the forest, your community's role, it could change how these lands are managed forever." The leader was silent for a moment, her hooded face turned slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she spoke again. "The heart has considered your offering. It is insufficient. But it represents a change from the deafness that came before. A first breath after centuries of silence." Relief flooded through me. "Then you'll give us time? Allow the scientific assessment?" "Time is measured differently in the grove," she replied. "But yes, we will wait. Watch. Listen for truth in your words." She gestured toward the forest around us. "The warnings you have witnessed will remain but not advance. For now. The machines will stay silent. The boundaries will stand." "And in return?" Howard asked, speaking for the first time. The leader turned toward him. "In return, you will learn. Not just with your instruments and tests, but with your hearts and minds. You will learn what it means to be part of a system rather than its master. To listen to the forest rather than merely manage it." She approached me then, moving with that uncanny grace that seemed almost supernatural despite her human form. From within her robes, she withdrew a small object, a pendant carved from what appeared to be the same wood as the heart, polished to a warm glow, and inscribed with the spiral pattern that symbolized the grove. "Wear this," she said, placing it in my palm. "It marks you as one who has seen, one who may walk between worlds. The pendant was warm to the touch, vibrating faintly as if with its own pulse. As my fingers closed around it, I felt a momentary connection to something vast and ancient. A consciousness that extended throughout the forest, observing through countless eyes, feeling through innumerable roots and branches. "Thank you," I whispered, understanding the significance of the gift. The leader stepped back. "We will watch your scientists, guide them if they prove worthy, protect the heart if they do not." She gestured toward the documents on the stone. "Take these back to your leaders. Tell them what you have seen and heard. Tell them the grove has existed long before their laws and boundaries, and will continue long after." With those words, she and her companions retreated to the forest edge. Just before they disappeared among the trees, she turned once more. "Remember, witness, you have seen both worlds now. You carry the responsibility of that vision." Then they were gone, melting into the forest as if they had never been more than shadows among the trees. Howard approached slowly, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. I don't even have words for what that was. I closed my fingers around the pendant, feeling its gentle warmth. The beginning of something new, or very old, depending on how you look at it. We gathered the documents and began the journey back, both lost in our own thoughts. The forest around us seemed different now, not just a collection of trees and wildlife, but a living system with its own intelligence and purpose. I wondered how I could ever have seen it otherwise. In the months that followed, Hollow Grove became the site of one of the most unusual scientific expeditions in Forest Service history. Experts from dozens of disciplines converged to document what I had glimpsed in my brief visit to the Hidden Valley. The grove remained mostly invisible during this process, appearing only occasionally to guide researchers toward particularly significant discoveries or to warn them away from areas too sacred for scientific scrutiny. The heart, when finally documented by botanical specialists, defied existing classification systems. Its influence on the surrounding ecosystem, through chemical signals, mycelial networks, and other mechanisms still not fully understood, confirmed everything the grove had claimed about its importance. As for me, I found myself in an unexpected role, a bridge between worlds, translating the grove's intentions for my colleagues and explaining scientific concepts to the few grove members willing to engage directly with our researchers. The pendant I wore seemed to grant me a limited ability to navigate the shifting paths of the forest, to find my way to meetings arranged through means I still didn't fully comprehend.